So in 2018, the MTR Corporation over in Hong Kong put out their annual corporate profits. And if you look closely at the financial breakdown in that report, you find this one staggering statistic that, honestly, it kind of completely redefines what a public transit system actually is.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. Because that year, an overwhelming 75% of MTR's total corporate profits came from the real estate and property development segment.
Mm.
And the core transportation services, the actual physical moving of millions of commuters on trains, that generated, what, only 16% of the profits?
Yeah, just 16%.
The trains themselves were basically operating as a loss leader.
Yeah.
So, if you are an urban planner sitting in a municipal office today, and you're trying to figure out how to fund or build or even just sustain a world-class transit system purely on the revenue from ticket sales, you were walking blindfolded into a fiscal black hole.
I mean, it's the ultimate structural deficit. Yeah. And it is the precise reason why the most successful railway operators in the world are not fundamentally transportation companies.
Right.
They are highly diversified real estate, retail, and lifestyle conglomerates. They just happen to operate rail lines to feed their primary economic engines.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that brings us to the core mission of our deep dive today. We've got this incredible stack of sources we're pulling from, including a deeply analytical paper out of the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo by Jeremy Deshang, which scrutinizes all these non-fare revenue mechanisms across Asia.
Yep, great paper.
We're also digging into corporate strategy documents straight from JR East, that's the East Japan Railway Company, and unpacking this massive, comprehensive, transit-oriented development guidebook from JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agency.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal today is to dissect exactly how these systems survive, and more importantly, how you, as a city planner, can actually apply these financial architectures to your own municipal grid.
Because look, the pressure on a city planner right now is just immense. You're caught in this brutal paradox. From an environmental and urban density standpoint, you don't have the luxury of abandoning rail.
No, not at all.
It's an absolute necessity. The University of Tokyo paper actually lays out the environmental data with terrifying clarity. If you look at emissions per passenger per kilometer traveled, the case for rail is undeniable.
Yeah, the numbers are just stark. Like, a domestic flight emits 133 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometer. But because those planes are up high in the atmosphere, the data points out that the secondary effects from high-altitude non-CO2 emissions, that adds another 121 grams.
Exactly.
So air travel is just an environmental disaster for short-haul metropolitan connectivity. But cars aren't really much better. A single occupancy vehicle, which, let's face it, still dominates commuter traffic in most Western cities, that sits at 171 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometer.
Right, 171. But then compare that to domestic rail, which drops all the way down to 41 grams.
Oh, wow.
And if you look at highly optimized electrified international rail, like the Eurostar, for example, it plummets to an astonishingly low 6 grams per passenger kilometer.
Wait, 6 grams?
6 grams versus 171 grams for a car.
That's insane.
I mean, when you scale that disparity across millions of commuters traversing a metropolitan area every single day, year after year, rail is pretty much the only mathematically viable way to move high volumes of human beings across a dense city without triggering a localized climate disaster.
But the infrastructure required to actually achieve those 6 grams is colossally expensive.
No, massively.
You've got tunneling, laying steel, securing rolling stock, maintaining complex signaling networks, and, paying the workforce.
Yeah.
These are multi-billion-dollar capital outlays, followed by relentless operational costs.
Right.
And as a planner, your hands are tied when it comes to your primary revenue stream, which is the ticket price. You're dealing with the reality of the fare cap.
Yeah, exactly.
Because transit is a public good, local politicians will always mandate that fares remain artificially low to ensure affordability for the working class.
Right, because you just cannot charge a commuter the true market rate cost of the infrastructure they're using.
Obviously not.
If you price out the working class, the transit system just fails its primary socioeconomic objective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the city's economy basically grinds to a halt. So this means that from day one, your core product, the train ride itself, is legally constrained from ever reaching profitability.
Mm-hmm.
You're operating at a permanent baked-in deficit if you only look at the fare box.
So we have this indispensable, hyper-expensive piece of infrastructure that is legally forbidden from charging its true value. That forces a massive pivot in corporate strategy.
Yep.
If the fare box is capped, Basically, every other square inch of the transit ecosystem has to be monetized.
Right.
Let's look at how JR East approaches this at a micro level first, before we get into the massive real estate developments.
Yeah, JR East provides this really fascinating case study in operational discipline. They don't just view their network as a transit system.
What do they view it as?
They view it as a sprawling portfolio of fixed assets, tracks, stations, maintenance yards, land corridors. And to ensure that portfolio is performing, they mandated a very specific financial metric across their entire corporate structure, the ROAR system.
Ah, right, the return on assets for the railway business.
Exactly.
It's essentially a mandate to maximize cash flow from existing infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
They calculate this by taking the fixed assets of the railway business as the denominator and their EBITDA as the numerator.
Precisely. They are hyper-focused on boosting that earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
The raw cash generation.
Yes, they need raw cash. And the mandate to every regional headquarters and branch office is to just ruthlessly evaluate their physical footprint and ask, how can we extract more non-fare revenue from this specific piece of concrete?
It really reminds me of like a family that stretches their budget to the absolute limit to buy this massive historic mansion.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. They own this incredible asset, but they're totally house poor. They're struggling to cover the property taxes and the maintenance, so what do?
Right.
They stop looking at it just as a home and start treating it as an income-generating asset.
Right.
They rent the carriage house on Airbnb. They lease the driveway to commuters because they live near a downtown stadium.
Yeah.
They let a film crew use the parlor.
Yeah, exactly.
They are relentlessly monetizing the physical space to subsidize the roof over their heads.
That analogy scales perfectly to JR East because they realized they were sitting on incredibly valuable, high-foot traffic real estate, but they were utilizing it poorly. The sources outline a very simple yet highly lucrative example of this shift, which is parking lots.
Ah, right.
Historically, JR East owned prime plots of land directly in front of their regional train stations, and they were using them as free employee parking.
Which, I mean, if you're looking at a municipal zoning map, is an egregious waste of high-value land.
Completely.
You have the most connected, centralized real estate in the whole neighborhood, and it's generating zero revenue because it's just holding an employee's Honda Civic.
Right. Under the ROA mandate, that kind of inefficiency was just eliminated. JR East converted those employee lots into paid customer parking. Instantly, an idle patch of asphalt became a recurring stream of non-fare revenue. And that directly boosted their EBITDA without requiring any new, heavy infrastructure investment.
And they applied that same logic to the interior of the stations, too. The documents highlight how they identified underutilized corners of their station buildings, areas that maybe lacked the foot traffic for high-end retail, and they leased them out to local municipal governments.
Yes, those spaces were converted into regional tourism hubs, and it solves a problem for both parties.
How so?
Well, the local government gets a highly visible, centralized location to promote regional attractions to arriving passengers, right? And JR East secures a reliable, rent-paying municipal tenant for a space that was otherwise just dead weight.
Oh, that's smart.
It's a whole culture of asset optimization. Every employee is trained to look at their environment and find the hidden revenue stream.
Okay, but renting out parking spaces and leasing little kiosks, while incredibly efficient, is still kind of just micro-optimization, right?
True.
It keeps the lights on and pays for immediate maintenance. But if you want to finance the construction of entirely new subway lines or massive infrastructure overhauls, you have to think much bigger. You have to move from squeezing pennies out of existing assets to generating billions through macro-level city building.
And that requires us to examine the two dominant real estate models that an urban planner absolutely must deeply understand if they want to build sustainable transit.
The Tokyo model and the Hong Kong model.
Exactly. The private sector transit-oriented development model pioneered in Tokyo, and the state-linked rail plus property model perfected in Hong Kong.
Let's start with Tokyo, specifically the approach taken by the Toki Corporation. Tokyo is fascinating because their historical approach wasn't just about navigating a dense existing city.
Right.
They built railway lines out into the undeveloped Tokyo suburbs, basically acting as massive land developers who used trains as the connective tissue for their new cities.
Yeah, the most prominent example from the research is the Tama Denentoshi project, which translates to the Tama Garden City.
Right.
This was a colossal urban redevelopment project spearheaded entirely by the private sector. Tokyo didn't just lay tracks, they master-planned residential neighborhoods, commercial hubs, and massive retail centers all along the transit corridor.
But the financial risk of doing that as a private company is just staggering. I mean, the sources explicitly note that Tokyo is a wholly privately owned company that executed this without government subsidies.
Right, no subsidy.
To buy up vast tracts of land, lay miles of rail, and construct entire communities, that requires a level of upfront capital expenditure that would terrify most modern corporate boards. How do they even justify that risk?
Well, the key to Tokyo's risk management strategy, and the real reason they were willing to absorb those immense initial costs, lies in the regulatory framework of their operation. Tokyo holds an indefinite concession.
Meaning they have the perpetual right to operate that railway line.
Yes,
The government isn't going to step in after 30 years and revoke their operating license or force them to hand over the tracks.
exactly. That perpetual certainty perfectly aligns their long-term incentives. They're willing to bear the staggering upfront costs of building a railway into an undeveloped suburb because they know they will operate the line and own the surrounding commercial real estate forever.
Wow.
They capture the entire life cycle of the value they create.
It creates a perfectly closed, self-sustaining financial ecosystem. So they build a station in a relatively undeveloped area. Then they construct highly desirable residential towers and retail complexes around that station, like their massive redevelopments in Futako Tamagawa and Shibuya. Because these developments are high quality and deeply integrated with transit, they attract a massive influx of residents.
Right, and every new resident that moves into a Tokyo-owned apartment building pays rent to Tokyo.
Oh, right.
When they go downstairs to buy groceries or shop for clothes at the Tokyo-On Mall, they generate retail revenue for Tokyo.
And crucially, when those residents need to commute to their jobs in central Tokyo, they swipe their transit card on the Tokyo train line.
Yeah.
The real estate development funds the capital costs of the railway, and the railway provides the permanent flow of human capital that makes the real estate immensely valuable.
Exactly.
It's brilliant, but it requires a very specific environment, doesn't it? Vast amounts of undeveloped land, a private sector willing to take on generational debt, and a government willing to grant an indefinite monopoly.
Which is why we really have to contrast it with the Hong Kong model run by the MTR Corporation. MTR operates in a hyperdense environment where vast suburban expansion simply isn't an option.
Right.
Furthermore, MTR is not a wholly private company, it's a majority state-owned entity. So because of this, they utilize a more concentrated yet intensely profitable system known as the Rail plus Property model, or R plus P.
So how does R plus P differ mechanically from Tokyo's sprawling, transit-oriented development?
Well, while Tokyo focuses on broad regional development, MTR focuses almost exclusively on the immediate footprint and the airspace directly above and adjacent to the transit station. The financial mechanics are heavily reliant on land valuation agreements with the Hong Kong government.
Now, this is the part that every municipal planner really needs to study.
Hmm.
The Hong Kong government wants to expand the subway system, but they don't want to fund the multi-billion-dollar construction out of the public treasury.
Yeah.
So they enter into a unique land deal with MTR.
Right. The government grants MTR the development rights to the land where the new stations will be built. But the critical lever here is that the government values that land on a greenfield basis.
Meaning MTR pays the pre-development, unenhanced price of the land. They're buying the dirt based on its value before a state-of-the-art transit hub is built on top of it.
Correct. MTR secures the land rights at a relatively low cost. They then deploy the capital to bore the tunnels, lay the tracks, and build the physical station. The very instant that station is completed, the value of the land directly above it skyrockets because it is now the most connected, high-traffic real estate in the district.
So MTR has instantly manufactured massive real estate value purely through the introduction of transit access. But MTR isn't necessarily a construction firm specializing in luxury high-rises, so how do they extract the cash?
They monetize that newly created value by putting the commercial development rights out to tender. They partner with private real estate developers. MTR brings the highly valuable transit-connected land rights to the table, and the private developer brings the construction expertise and the capital to build the shopping malls or residential towers directly over the station.
So they split the development costs and they split the massive profits.
Yep.
And MTR uses their share of those real estate profits, whether through outright sales or long-term leasing revenue, to entirely recoup the initial infrastructure costs of building the railway. And then that ongoing leasing revenue provides a permanent cross-subsidy that allows them to keep the actual train fares remarkably affordable for the public.
It is an incredibly efficient land value capture mechanism. It forces the very real estate that benefits from the public transit to pay for the existence of that public transit.
Which brings us back to that staggering statistic from the University of Tokyo paper. The fact that MTR generates 75% of its profits from property and only 16% from transport.
Yeah.
The sources even include a timeline demonstrating how these property profits explicitly spiked following the opening of major new infrastructure projects, like the Airport Railway Line in 1997 and the Soong Kwan O Line in 2002. Every time they lay new track, they're essentially printing money in the real estate sector.
But I want to pull back a bit and look at the consumer psychology of this because it frames the ethical debate around these models. If we look at the R plus P model objectively, it bears a striking resemblance to the economic model of a theme park.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Are you saying it's basically like a theme park operator who might take a theoretical loss or at least operate on incredibly thin margins regarding the actual price of admission at the front gate?
Yes.
Like, they keep the entrance ticket just affordable enough to maximize foot traffic.
Because they know that once you are inside the gates, you are a captive audience. The real profit margins are in the food, the merchandise, the luxury hotels on the property.
Ah, right.
MTR is applying that exact captive audience strategy to metropolitan infrastructure. They take a hit on the heavily subsidized, artificially cheap train ticket because they know that to get from the platform to the street, you literally have to walk through an MTR-owned shopping mall.
So the commuter is the captive audience, and the cross-subsidy is generated by capturing their retail spending and their housing costs.
Yep.
It's a flawless financial machine. So, look, if I'm a city planner listening to this, my immediate reaction is to embrace this entirely. I want to grant a 50-year concession to a private developer, or set up a state-owned entity like MTR, let them build skyscrapers on top of my transit hubs, and deliver world-class transit to my constituents at zero cost to the taxpayer. It sounds like a political utopia. It does sound utopian on a spreadsheet, but that assumption leads us directly into a massive vulnerability that plagues these systems, the governance trap.
Okay, the governance trap.
The financial engineering is indeed brilliant, but the political reality of implementing these long-term concessions is incredibly volatile.
Right, because nothing involving municipal land rights and public infrastructure is ever frictionless. If you grant a private company like Tokyo an indefinite concession or give an operator a 50-year lease, you are fundamentally creating a natural monopoly over a vital public artery.
And monopolies inherently breed public resentment over time. A commuter cannot simply choose to utilize a competing drain line if the service degrades.
No, they're stuck.
Right. If your local grocery store is poorly managed, you drive to a different one. But if the only transit corridor connecting your suburb to the financial district is constantly delayed, you have no alternative. You are entirely beholden to a single corporate entity.
But the governance trap becomes infinitely more dangerous for a city planner when we introduce state-linked political risk.
Oh, absolutely.
We have to look at the psychological difference in how the public perceives a purely private operator versus a partially state-owned entity.
The contrast is pretty stark. Let's look at Tokyo Corporation in Japan versus MTR in Hong Kong, or SMRT Corporation in Singapore.
Okay.
Tokyo is a purely private conglomerate. If a Tokyo train suffers a mechanical failure and thousands of commuters are late for work, the public directs their anger squarely at the corporation. It is framed as a corporate failure, a breach of consumer trust.
They blame the CEO, they blame the board of directors. It's a private sector scandal.
Exactly. But if an MTR train in Hong Kong or an SMRT train in Singapore breaks down, the public psychology shifts completely. Because those entities are majority state-owned or heavily state-linked, the public does not view a service disruption as a mere corporate failing.
What do they view it as?
They view it as a direct failure of government competence.
Right. And the sources actually outline this exact phenomenon. They detail how periods of poor rail reliability and frequent breakdowns in both Hong Kong and Singapore led to massive, destabilizing political fallout for the ruling government.
Yeah, massive fallout.
The public didn't care that MTR or SMRT had their own separate corporate boards or independent management structures. To the commuter suffocating on a stalled train, that train represents the state. And if the train is broken, the government has failed them.
Which puts the municipal planner in a paralyzing, unwinnable position. The entire reason you set up a partially privatized long-term concession model was to offload the financial and operational risk.
Right.
You wanted the corporate entity to handle the day-to-day headaches so the government could be hands-off. But when a crisis hits, you discover that while you gave up all the operational control, you retained 100% of the political liability.
That is just the definition of a raw deal. You granted a 50-year monopoly, you can't fire the operator because of the ironclad contract, but your mayor is getting voted out of office because the trains are running late. So if the long-term concession model is a political landmine for local governments, how are modern cities adapting?
Well, they're adapting by fundamentally rewriting the legal architecture of transit operation. Because of this precise political and operational vulnerability, we are witnessing a global paradigm shift away from decades-long land concessions and moving aggressively toward what is known as the contracting model.
Okay, the contracting model. This is a radical departure from everything we've discussed so far, right? In the traditional concession model, the railway operator, whether it's Tokyo or NPR, they own the heavy infrastructure. They own the physical trains, the signaling systems, the miles of steel track, and they held the long-term rights to the land. What happens under this new contracting model?
Under the contracting model, the government reclaims total ownership of the physical assets.
Wow.
The state owns the concrete, the steel, the tracks, the stations, and the rolling stock. The railway operator is completely stripped of its asset ownership. Instead, the government issues short-term operational contracts, typically spanning only 5 to 15 years, and puts them up for competitive public bidding.
So the operator is essentially just a specialized staffing and logistics agency.
Pretty much.
They provide the conductors, the maintenance crews, the scheduling algorithms, and the operational expertise. They don't have to raise billions in capital to build a tunnel. They just lease the pre-built tunnel from the government and run the trains.
Precisely. And this immediately solves the monopoly problem. If an operator's performance degrades, the government doesn't have to suffer through 3 more decades of a 50-year concession.
They just kick them out.
Yeah, they simply wait for the short-term contract to expire and award the next 5-year operational lease to a more competent competitor. It injects a ruthless competitive pressure into an industry that was historically entirely stagnant.
And the data shows that this competitive pressure actually works. The research points to Singapore as the defining case study for this transition. Singapore explicitly moved away from their historical 30 to 40-year concession model and adopted a 15-year contracting model with a potential 5-year extension based on performance.
Crucially, the government took back ownership of the operating assets, including the trains and the complex signaling systems, while leaving the operator, SMRT, solely responsible for the day-to-day maintenance and service delivery. They also implemented a much harsher regulatory regime.
Meaning fines.
Oh, yeah.
Ugh.
Severe financial penalties for failing to meet strict maintenance performance standards.
And the results of that shift are quantified in a metric called MKBF, mean kilometers between failure. It is the ultimate diagnostic for system reliability, right? It measures how far the entire fleet of trains can travel, on average, before experiencing a major delay lasting 5 minutes or more.
Right, and before the new contracting model was strictly enforced around 2014 and 2015, Singapore's MKBF numbers were struggling. It really reflected the complacency of the old concession era. But look at the trajectory after the contracting model was implemented on the major lines in 2016.
The growth is explosive. By 2018, the Northeast Line, the NEL, achieved an astounding MKBF of 1,369,000 kilometers.
Over 1.3 million kilometers of cumulative fleet travel without a single delay exceeding 5 minutes.
The downtown line reached 928,000 kilometers, and the North-South line hit 894,000. It is a vertical leap in reliability, directly correlated to the new contract structure. And unsurprisingly, public satisfaction scores jumped from a mediocre 7.3 out of 10 to a much healthier 7.9.
Right.
The public tangibly felt the impact of competitive operational standards.
What's fascinating here is that while the operational benefits are clear, the financial mechanics of these short-term contracts are highly complex. For a city planner, managing the financial risk under this model requires choosing between 2 very different payment structures: the leasing model versus the profit-sharing model.
Okay, let's unpack those, starting with the leasing model. How does the cash flow work when the government owns the assets and the operator just runs the staff?
Well, in a pure leasing model, the government pays the private operator a guaranteed, fixed sum of money to run the trains to a specified standard for the duration of the 5 or 15-year contract. In return, the government collects 100% of the fare revenue generated by the commuters.
Wait, if the government pays the operator a fixed guaranteed fee, that means the operator is taking absolutely zero fare risk.
Zero.
If a sudden economic downturn occurs or a global pandemic hits and ridership drops by 80%, the operator still collects their full contracted paycheck from the city.
That is correct. The operator's corporate revenue is completely insulated from the reality of passenger ridership. They're simply paid to execute a service level, regardless of whether the trains are full or entirely empty.
I mean, as an executive at an operating company, that sounds like a dream scenario. But if I am the municipal planner managing the city's budget, that is terrifying. The city is absorbing 100% of the financial risk. You're on the hook for massive fixed operational payouts, even if the fare revenue evaporates. It's a recipe for municipal bankruptcy.
Which is precisely why many sophisticated municipalities, including Singapore, lean heavily toward the profit-sharing model. Under this structure, the operator does not receive a guaranteed fixed fee. Instead, the operator pays the government a license charge for the right to utilize the state-owned assets and operate the transit lines.
But where does that license charge go? In many cities, those fees just vanish into the general municipal tax pool to pay for unrelated projects, leaving the transit system starved for maintenance funds down the road.
That's a critical failure point in many regions, but Singapore avoids it through strict financial discipline. That license charge does not go into the general fund.
Right.
It is legally ring-fenced and deposited directly into a railway sinking fund. That fund is strictly mandated to be used only for the future replacement, upgrading, and heavy maintenance of the railway's operating assets. It structurally forces the transit ecosystem to save for its own inevitable depreciation.
That is incredibly smart foresight. And how does the operator make money if they are paying this massive license charge?
Well, in the profit-sharing model, the operator and the government split the actual fare revenues based on a negotiated formula.
Ah,
This fundamentally realigns the incentive structure. The operator now has a massive existential incentive to run a clean, hyper-efficient, on-time service that attracts maximum ridership. If the trains are late and people start taking buses or driving, the operator's profit margin collapses. Their financial success is inextricably linked to the public's desire for high-quality service.
okay. The profit-sharing contracting model sounds like the perfect balance. You solve the monopoly issue with short terms, you align incentives, and you enforce sinking funds for future maintenance.
Yes.
But I have to push back here.
Sure.
We're ignoring the elephant in the room. In the first half of this deep dive, we explicitly established that the fare box revenue, even in a perfectly run system, almost never covers the true, fully loaded cost of the infrastructure and operations.
Oh.
In the old model, Tokyo and MTR used massive real estate empires to cover that massive shortfall. But in this new contracting model, the operator doesn't own the land. They can't build a 50-story shopping mall to subsidize their operational losses. So, mathematically, who pays for the structural deficit? Does the government just end up absorbing the financial black hole anyway?
Your pushback hits the absolute core vulnerability of the contracting model. The blunt answer is yes. The dark side of stripping away the long-term land concessions is that it completely neuters the real estate cross-subsidy that made these systems financially viable in the first place. The government is forced to take on the massive upfront capital costs and absorb significant long-term financial risk. And the sources provide two stark cautionary tales of how this separation of infrastructure ownership from operational incentive can go disastrously wrong. The United Kingdom and the Hokkaido region of Japan.
Let's examine the UK first. The research specifically calls out the UK network for suffering from extreme structural fragmentation.
Yeah, the UK attempted a highly complex privatization and contracting model, but they fractured the system way too deeply. In the UK, you might have an operating company that wins the contract to run a specific passenger route, but that operator does not own the trains they're using. They lease the rolling stock from a separate private leasing company.
Okay.
Furthermore, they do not own the tracks they drive on. They must pay access charges to a completely different entity responsible for maintaining the physical rails.
Wait, so 3 different companies. That sounds like a bureaucratic labyrinth. You have 3 different corporate entities, all requiring their own profit margins, just to run a single train from point A to point B.
And the inevitable result is a catastrophic diffusion of responsibility. When a massive delay occurs, the operating company blames the track maintenance entity for poor rail conditions. The track entity blames the train leasing company for supplying faulty rolling stock.
Oh, what a mess.
The paper notes that this convoluted architecture has led to widespread allegations of profiteering and opaque collusion. Because responsibility is so thoroughly fractured, No single party has the authority or the financial incentive to implement systemic long-term improvements.
It's the classic organizational nightmare of having too many stakeholders with conflicting incentives. And the commuter is the one who suffers the poor service while the taxpayer foots the bill for the inefficiencies.
Exactly. And then we look at JR Hokkaido in Japan, which highlights an entirely different but equally fatal risk that governments absorb when they separate real estate from transit geographic and demographic collapse.
Right. Hokkaido is the vast northernmost main island of Japan. It's geographically beautiful, but is currently experiencing severe demographic contraction, particularly in its rural municipalities.
The operational data for JR Hokkaido is incredibly grim. Because they are operating in an environment of rapid depopulation, the fare revenues are plummeting. The sources indicate that over half of their entire rail network, specifically 13 sections spanning an immense 1,236.2 kilometers, is officially designated as not independently sustainable.
Over 1,200 kilometers of track that is fundamentally unprofitable to operate because there simply aren't enough human beings left in those regions to buy tickets.
And in a system where the government or a heavily state-backed entity absorbs the financial loss, this creates a brutal zero-sum political dilemma. The local government is backed into a corner.
What are their options?
Well, do they drain the municipal budget to heavily subsidize these ghost lines, burning through taxpayer money just to maintain a transit lifeline for a few rapidly aging isolated communities? Or do they make the ruthless financial decision to cut the lines, abandon the infrastructure entirely, and effectively sever those rural towns from the region's economic grid?
It's the ultimate ethical nightmare for a regional planner. There is no mathematical solution that doesn't involve inflicting pain on either the taxpayer or the rural citizen. It perfectly illustrates the flaw of the pure contracting model in struggling areas.
Right.
If an operator had a long-term land concession, they might at least have a financial incentive to attempt to develop those rural areas, build tourism infrastructure, or create new housing to artificially boost ridership. But under a short-term contract without land rights, the operator has zero incentive to engage in community development. They just run the empty trains to fulfill their contract and forward the invoice to the government.
Which forces us to confront the ultimate synthesis of this deep dive. If the long-term concession model creates political monopolies and the short-term contracting model strips away the vital real estate cross-subsidy, how do you actually build a sustainable system?
Exactly. So as a city planner, if you're looking at an empty map right now and want to build a system from scratch today, how do you merge the financial firepower of transit-oriented development with the political accountability of modern governance?
Fortunately, the research provides a highly detailed, actionable blueprint. We can draw heavily from the JICA Transit-Oriented Development Guidelines.
Excellent.
JICA has spent decades analyzing both the spectacular successes of Tokyo and the agonizing failures of fragmented systems, and they've synthesized this data into a step-by-step methodology for planners.
Okay, let's walk through that playbook. If I'm drafting the proposal tomorrow, what is the absolute foundation? Where do I start?
The foundation is what JICA calls the Comprehensive Development Master Plan, or CDM, and the critical insight here is regarding scale. You cannot execute successful TOD piecemeal, negotiating neighborhood by neighborhood or station by station.
So a local city council resolution isn't enough.
Not even close. JICA explicitly mandates that the national or overarching metropolitan government must take the lead. True transit-oriented development is a solution to macro-level metropolitan scale issues, traffic congestion, regional carbon emissions, housing shortages. You require heavy top-down legislative frameworks that dictate policy objectives across the entire region for decades to come.
The sources provide concrete examples of the necessary scale for this legislation, right? They point to the Grand Paris Act for the Paris metropolitan area, or the Crossrail Act in London.
Yes.
In Japan, they utilize the massive Multipolar Patterns National Land Formation Promotion Act. These aren't just zoning tweaks. These are generational legal frameworks that draw a line in the sand and declare this is the precise corridor where our metropolitan growth will be concentrated for the next 50 years.
That level of statutory certainty is non-negotiable. Because without that massive government-backed guarantee of long-term development, the private sector will never risk the billions of dollars in capital required to build the real estate that subsidizes the transit. Which leads directly into the second and perhaps most powerful tool in the planner's playbook, utilizing legal and business support systems to incentivize that private capital.
This is the exact mechanism I want to dissect, because this is the alchemy of urban planning. How do you actually convince a private, profit-driven real estate developer to willingly pay for massive public infrastructure upgrades.
The secret currency of municipal planning is FAR, floor area ratio.
Okay, let's ensure we are totally clear on the mechanics of FAR, because it is the linchpin of this strategy. Floor area ratio dictates the legal density of a plot of land. It is the ratio of a building's total allowable floor area to the size of the piece of land it sits on.
Right.
So just so we are totally clear, if a developer owns a 10,000 square foot lot and the strict municipal zoning laws dictate a FAR of 1.0, they can build a 10,000 square foot one-story building. Or they could build a two-story building where each floor is 5,000 square feet. But they cannot exceed that total volume.
Correct. FAR is the absolute limit on how much leasable, profit-generating space a developer can extract from a piece of land. And in most major cities, FAR is strictly capped to prevent overcrowding, shadow casting, and infrastructure strain.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But JIGA outlines how brilliant planners use special floor area ratio bonuses as a fiat currency to fund transit without spending tax dollars.
The city essentially prints money out of thin air simply by altering a zoning ordinance. But they only deploy this power in highly targeted zones directly adjacent to transit stations.
The research highlights the redevelopment of Tokyo Station as the ultimate masterclass in utilizing FI bonuses. The area surrounding Tokyo Station desperately needed modernization, and the historic, iconic red brick facade of the station itself required a massive, incredibly expensive restoration.
Mm-hmm.
But the railway operator was unwilling to bear the entirety of that historical preservation cost.
So the municipal government steps into the negotiation room. They look at the private developers who want to build the Grand Tokyo North and South Towers, these massive commercial skyscrapers flanking the station.
Yep.
The developers are constrained by the existing FIR limits. The city makes a trade.
Yes. The government granted the developers of the Grand Tokyo Towers an astounding additional 404% FIR bonus.
Wait, 404%.
404.
They legally permitted those developers to construct skyscrapers more than 4 times larger than what the standard zoning regulations would have allowed. The sheer volume of extra, highly lucrative commercial office space that 404% represents is worth billions in future leasing revenue to those developers.
But that massive density bonus was not given away for free. In direct exchange for the legal right to build those incredibly profitable upper floors, the developers were required to foot the bill for the public infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
The financial windfall from that FR sale paid entirely for the historic brick facade restoration of Tokyo Station, and it funded the construction of the sprawling, highly complex pedestrian station plaza.
It is the absolute pinnacle of land value capture. The public received a beautifully restored world-class transit hub and a vital public square. The developer received a massive, hyper-profitable skyscraper, and it cost the municipal taxpayer virtually nothing. It was funded entirely by the city's willingness to allow the private sector to build taller in a targeted transit zone.
And you see this strategy replicated repeatedly in the data. The Tokyo Building Project received an additional 266% FAR bonus. The JP Tower kit development secured a 220% bonus.
Amazing.
As an urban planner, your zoning authority, your ability to grant or restrict FAR is your most potent financial asset. If you need a private developer to fund a pedestrian skybridge connecting a new transit station to a local hospital, you don't ask the Treasury for the money. You offer that developer an extra 50% FAR on their next luxury residential tower, contingent on them building the bridge. It is a highly sophisticated barter system.
But I have to imagine that executing that barter system is incredibly difficult in practice. Granting a 404% density bonus inevitably triggers massive pushback. You have local community groups furious about a new skyscraper blocking their sunlight. You have traffic engineers worried about congestion. How do you actually push this through the bureaucracy?
That brings us to the organizational hurdles. Jacob frames this as the 3 T's, the mandatory triggers for TDD success: timeliness, land, and teamwork.
Timeliness seems obvious, but what does it mean in a bureaucratic context?
It means that all aspects of the regulatory environment must be aligned and executed simultaneously. You cannot have a situation where the transit authority has the capital ready to lay the track, but the municipal zoning board takes 5 years to debate and approve the FAR bonuses.
Right, the developers would just walk away.
Exactly. If the regulatory timeline drags, private capital will flee to simpler projects, and the window of opportunity closes permanently.
Okay, the second T is land. And the directive here is aggressive. Secure the public land early.
You must secure the real estate corridors before the mere announcement of the transit project triggers rampant land speculation that drives acquisition prices into the stratosphere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
JA even advises establishing highly specialized, temporary organizations solely tasked with managing and holding unused public land during the transition period. They cite the Japanese National Railways Settlement Corporation as a historical blueprint for managing massive land portfolios during periods of heavy infrastructure transition.
And the final T is teamwork, which, look, sounds like a corporate platitude, but the sources emphasize that in the context of municipal governance, it is shockingly rare and absolutely vital.
It is incredibly rare because municipal bureaucracies are deeply siloed. JICA stresses that successful TOD requires seamless, integrated collaboration between the urban transport departments and the urban development departments.
Right, because historically, those two departments operate in complete isolation, often with conflicting mandates. The Transport Department's only goal is to lay track from point A to point B as quickly and cheaply as possible to meet a political deadline. Meanwhile, the Urban Development Department is entirely focused on meeting affordable housing quotas and managing zoning disputes. They almost never speak to each other.
And if you don't force them into the same room, you end up with a disaster. You build a beautiful, multi-million-dollar new train station, but because the development team wasn't consulted, the station is surrounded by a massive, unwalkable 6-lane highway, completely disconnected from the residential community it was built to serve.
Ugh, yeah, we've all seen those stations.
Right. JAGA points to Himeji Station as a prime example of overcoming this. The key to their success was creating a specific, centralized organization strictly in charge of TOD, effectively forcing the transport engineers and the zoning planners to collaborate on a unified vision.
Okay, so a planner has established the master plan. They are aggressively utilizing FR bonuses to fund the infrastructure, and they force their departments to collaborate. The final step outlined by JACA is the ultimate reality check, the math of viability.
Because you cannot force transit-oriented development into an environment that lacks the underlying demographic fundamentals. You cannot simply drop a massive, mixed-use, luxury commercial hub on a rural transit stop that serves 50 people a day and expect the real estate to subsidize the train.
You need a critical mass of human foot traffic. And JACA doesn't just theorize about this. They provide the hard data thresholds.
They state definitively that for a true, large-scale commercial and business-oriented TOD to be financially viable, the kind of massive projects that generate significant cross-subsidy revenue the station must process over 200,000 daily passengers.
200,000 people a day. That is a massive threshold. That's the volume required to sustain the skyline-altering developments we see in central Tokyo or Hong Kong. If you are a planner in a mid-sized city and your busiest hub only sees 50,000 people a day, what do? Do you abandon the TOD strategy entirely?
Not entirely. JACA notes that partial TOD deployment is possible at lower volumes. Integrating localized retail, a small public plaza, and mid-density residential housing can be financially supported by a station processing between 30,000 and 200,000 daily passengers, but you must scale your ambitions and your revenue projections to the reality of the foot traffic.
This raises an important question. JACA actually built a complex regression model for planners to calculate this exact viability. Now, without boring everyone with the raw algebra, the math mathematically proves a crucial insight. Viability isn't just a function of how many total people live in your city. It is deeply, inextricably correlated to geographic density.
That is the core takeaway of their formula. You
Yeah.
cannot fake the math. If your municipality has a massive population, but that population is spread out over hundreds of square miles of low-density suburban sprawl, traditional large-scale TOD simply will not work. The foot traffic will never concentrate heavily enough at a single node to generate the massive, non-fair retail and commercial revenue required to subsidize the heavy railway infrastructure.
Which is an incredibly sobering thought for a planner operating in a sprawling, car-centric North American or Australian city, for example. If your geographic density is too low to support massive physical real estate development around a station, how do you generate the non-fair revenue needed to survive?
Yeah, that's the big challenge.
Or, looking even further ahead, what happens when our relationship with physical commercial real estate changes entirely? If pouring millions of tons of concrete and building physical shopping malls is the old way to subsidize transit, what does the digital future look like for these operators?
That brings us to the bleeding edge of transit strategy. The University of Tokyo paper points toward the budding new frontier that operators are desperately trying to master MaaS, Mobility as a Service.
Mobility as a service.
Yeah.
It's a term that gets thrown around a lot in tech circles, but let's define exactly what it means for a traditional railway operator trying to balance a municipal budget.
Traditionally, a railway operator's relationship with the commuter was strictly geographically bound. Their interaction with you began the moment you walked through their physical turnstile, and it ended the exact second you exited their station.
Right.
But MaaS is about transcending those physical boundaries and integrating the entire journey, specifically attacking what urban planners call the first and last mile problem.
Right. Because the train doesn't go directly to my living room and it doesn't drop me off at my office desk. I still have to figure out how to navigate the mile from my house to the suburban station and the mile from the downtown hub to my workplace.
Exactly. And instead of just running the train in the middle of that journey, forward-thinking operators are attempting to transform themselves into holistic digital mobility platforms. They envision a single, seamless digital application where a commuter can plan, book, and pay for their entire trip.
Okay, so how does it work?
Well, you use their app to rent an e-scooter or a municipal bike share for that first mile from your house. The app seamlessly generates the QR code for your train fare. And when you arrive downtown, the app has already booked an automated shuttle bus for the last mile to your office.
Okay, I understand the convenience for the commuter. But how does this actually transform the operator's revenue streams? If an operator like JR East isn't building a massive physical shopping mall because the suburban density is too low, how are they extracting enough profit from an e-scooter rental to subsidize a train line?
They extract value in two distinct ways. The immediate revenue comes from transaction fees. By controlling the central MaaS platform, the transit operator takes a percentage cut of every single mobility transaction happening across the entire ecosystem, regardless of whether they physically own the e-scooter or the shuttle bus.
Oh, I see.
They become the payment gateway for metropolitan movement. But the true long-term value lies in the second factor, data capture.
Data becomes the new real estate.
Exactly. In the traditional model, MTR knew you walked through their station, so they charged a retailer rent for the privilege of putting a physical billboard in front of your face. But in a fully realized MaaS ecosystem, the transit operator captures an incredibly granular digital footprint of your entire life.
That's a little terrifying.
Well, they know exactly where you live, they know the exact minute you leave your house, they know you stop at a specific coffee shop on the way to the station every Tuesday, they know what train you take, and they know the exact address of your final destination.
That level of behavioral data is immensely valuable. They can monetize that footprint through highly targeted digital advertising within the app, partnering with local businesses to offer personalized retail discounts based on your exact commuting route, and utilizing the aggregate data to hyper-optimize their own operational efficiency, reducing empty train runs and saving millions in energy costs.
It represents a profound philosophical shift for these massive conglomerates. It is the transition from extracting physical rent from concrete and land to extracting digital value from a comprehensive behavioral ecosystem. If a transit operator can successfully master the MaaS platform, they may eventually reduce their reliance on massive physical retail spaces, allowing them to remain profitable even in lower density environments where traditional TOD fails.
It's a brilliant pivot, but it requires a level of software engineering and digital agility that legacy concrete and steel railway companies are not traditionally known for. So what does this all mean? Let's pull all of this together. We've covered an immense amount of ground, exploring the hidden financial architecture of the cities we live in. We started with the harsh foundational reality that a train ticket, artificially capped by political necessity, will never pay for the true cost of the train.
We examine the micro-optimizations, seeing how operators like JR East ruthlessly squeeze cash out of underutilized assets like parking lots to boost their EBITDA.
We explored the massive skyline-altering visions of macro development. We saw how Tokyo utilizes indefinite private concessions to build sprawling suburban utopias, and how Hong Kong's MTR manipulates greenfield land valuations to create a hyper-profitable land value capture machine, turning commuters into a captive audience for their real estate empire.
We navigated the treacherous governance traps, acknowledging that while long-term concessions generate wealth, they create natural monopolies. And we saw how state-linked operators absorb all the political fury when systems fail, driving the global shift toward the short-term, highly competitive operational contracts utilized in Singapore.
And we walked step by step through JICA's playbook for municipal planners, highlighting the immense power of floor area ratio bonuses. We saw how planners can literally print municipal currency by offering density bonuses to private developers in exchange for funding public infrastructure, provided they have the top-down master plans and the departmental teamwork to execute the deals.
Ultimately, what this research proves is that being an urban planner tasked with transit is not a job about laying tracks on a map.
Not all.
It is about acting as a real estate mogul, a sophisticated risk manager, a digital platform strategist, and a social architect all at the exact same time. It requires a holistic, deeply cynical, yet highly creative understanding of how human behavior, municipal finance, and massive physical infrastructure intersect.
But before we let you return to your zoning maps and budget spreadsheets, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought. It's a scenario that builds on the vulnerabilities we've discussed today, and it's something every planner must prepare for.
We have spent this entire deep dive establishing that the only way modern railways survive is by relying on real estate, specifically high-density, centralized commercial office and retail space around major transit hubs, to cross-subsidize the massive losses of the transit operation itself. The train brings the workers to the office tower pays for the train.
Right.
But we are currently living through a massive, unprecedented global shift in how human beings work. As remote work and hybrid schedules become permanently entrenched, the fundamental premium placed on central, high-density commercial office space is dropping.
Which strikes at the very heart of the model.
Exactly. If the post-pandemic era dictates that we no longer need massive centralized office hubs, what happens to the rail plus property model? What happens to Tokyo's suburban commuter lines if people stop commuting 5 days a week? If the commercial real estate bubble bursts and those massive towers above the transit stations sit half empty, the cross-subsidy engine stalls.
The primary revenue stream just evaporates.
And if that happens, the terrifying question is, does the public transit system collapse under its own weight? Or does this impending real estate crisis force governments to finally fundamentally accept that transit cannot be a profitable enterprise and must be treated as a pure, heavily subsidized public service entirely funded by the taxpayer?
It's a daunting question, and if you're sitting in a municipal planning office today, it is the question that will define your career over the next decade. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration of the data, the models, and the political realities has given you a sharper lens through which to view the challenges in your own city. We encourage you to look at your local transit hub with fresh eyes tomorrow.
Don't just look at the schedule. Look at the land use. Look at the zoning heights. Look at the retail footprint. See the financial ecosystem that makes the train move.
Because the next time you stare at that transit map, you'll know that those clean geometric lines are an illusion. They represent a complex, fragile, and absolutely vital financial circulatory system. Keep building, keep planning, and we will see you on the next deep dive.